Hello, my dear friend. You found your way here, to this little corner of the night. Maybe you couldn't sleep. Maybe your heart feels heavy. Maybe you're just curious. Whatever brought you, I'm glad you're here. Tonight, let me tell you a story. It's not about heroes in capes or kingdoms lost to war. It's about something smaller, softer, easier to miss. It's about kindness, the kind we forget to mention, the kind we see but don't always say aloud. So close your eyes, or don't. Get comfortable. Pull your blanket closer to your chest. Let your thoughts slow like honey in warm tea. And let me whisper you to a place where memory lingers and history hums like a lullaby. They say that greatness is loud, that it roars on battlefields or echoes in marble halls. But sometimes greatness whispers in shoes polished with care, in the hush between footsteps, in a president's eyes. Imagine Washington, 1863. The war was a beast, chewing through sons and fathers and fields. And yet, every morning, at precisely 3 minutes past 7, a boy named Samuel arrived at the north steps of the White House. He was 13. He carried a small wooden box, a rag worn thin at the corners, and a quiet sort of pride. Samuel was Lincoln's shoeshine boy. He wasn't on any official payroll. He had no title, no uniform, just a nod from the guards and an unspoken agreement that a president's boots should shine even in wartime. Lincoln never asked. He never paid. But every morning he offered Samuel the same thing, a look, one that said thank you, without saying a word. Samuel lived 3 blocks away in a narrow tenement where water leaked from ceilings and dreams were patched like trousers. His mother washed linens for army officers. His father had died at Antietam. A letter had come, soaked with the scent of battlefield mud and dried tears. Samuel never read it. He just held it sometimes, like it might warm his hands. He took the shoeshine job after that. It wasn't about the coins people dropped in his box. It was about doing something, keeping shoes clean in a world that was bleeding. And then there was Lincoln. Lincoln, with his sad, carved face, his tall hat always slightly off-center, his eyes like windows that had watched too many funerals. Yet he looked at Samuel each morning like he mattered. Once, in January snow, Samuel arrived late. The guards waved him through, but Lincoln's boots were already damp with slush. Samuel dropped to his knees and worked quickly, not speaking. He felt ashamed, like he'd failed somehow. When he looked up, Lincoln was watching him, and then the president did something strange. He sat down on the steps beside him. Not a word, just sat. For 3 minutes, maybe 4. 2 figures in silence. One boy, one leader of a divided nation, side by side, like equals, like friends. And when Samuel finished, Lincoln stood, nodded once, and disappeared inside. My dear friend, let us imagine Samuel writing in his diary That night, he sat beside me today, just like that. Didn't say a word. I thought maybe he was sad, but it didn't feel like heavy sad. It felt like he was letting something go, like the silence meant something. I don't know why, but I wanted to tell Mama about it. I wanted to tell the world, but then I didn't. Maybe some things are supposed to stay quiet, like a prayer you whisper just for yourself. Years passed. The war ended. The president fell to a bullet and a balcony. Samuel was 17 when he heard. He was shining a pair of boots outside a tavern when the news came. The world blurred. The rag dropped from his hand. That night, he walked to the White House. The guards no longer knew him, but he stood outside the gates, holding his wooden box like a holy relic. He didn't cry. He just stood, watching the light flicker in the windows where once a man with sorrowful eyes had thanked him. Every morning, without words. No history books mention Samuel. No statues wear his name. But if you go to the Lincoln Memorial and look closely at the bronze shoes, they shine just a little more than the rest. Not from tourists or time, but from memory, from the small, forgotten kindnesses that history never writes down, the ones it carries in secret. The world remembers the loud things, but the soul remembers the quiet ones. A nod, a glance, a boy with a box, a president with too much weight on his shoulders, and just enough gentleness in his gaze. Kindness doesn't always make headlines, but it stays. In eyes, in shoeshine rags, in steps taken side by side. Maybe the greatest thank yous are the ones we never say aloud. My dear friend, if no one told you today, thank you for the quiet things, the little ways you carry light, the smiles you offer without reason, the times you listened when it was easier to walk away. Somewhere, someone remembers, even if it's just the moon. Sleep now, if you can, and if not, just rest. Let your thoughts drift like paper boats on sleepy rivers. The night is long, but it's gentle, and I'll be here again next time you can't sleep, whispering you a story from somewhere between memory and moonlight. My sleepy friend, there's something special about the light in the dark, isn't there? It calls to us, even when we can't see its source. As you lay awake, let me tell you of a girl who, though unseen by the ships she guided, became their silent companion across the vast, endless sea. Imagine the sea stretching on forever, its waves whispering secrets only the moon and the stars understand. But first, let the quiet of the night wrap around you. The story is about to begin. In a small village that clung to the edge of a windswept coast, there stood a lighthouse, a tall, steadfast tower of stone that reached upward like a silent guardian. The ocean roared endlessly below, its waves crashing against the jagged rocks, a constant reminder of the wild, untamed world beyond. It was here, in this desolate place, where the wind howled and the salt of the sea never left your skin, that Eliza lived. Her father, the keeper of the lighthouse, had taught her to climb the narrow, winding staircase since she was a child. Each evening, she would rise with the setting sun, and together they would light the great lamp at the top of the lighthouse. Eliza had always known the importance of the task. The light was the only thing standing between the ships at sea, and the dangers lurking in the waves, the rocks, the fog, the unseen, all-consuming dark. Her father would explain to her, in his low, rumbling voice, "This light is their guide, Eliza. It will always be there, even if they cannot see us. It will keep them safe." And so, each night, without fail, she would climb the stairs to light the great lamp, her hands steady, her heart full of purpose. The sea held a strange power over Eliza, a magnetic pull that she could never quite escape. Though she had never stepped foot on a ship, the thought of it captivated her. She would stand on the rocky shore, staring out at the horizon, where the ocean met the sky, wondering about the men who sailed across it. Her father had told her stories of sailors, tales of adventure, of distant lands, and of storms that could swallow a ship whole. The ships that passed the lighthouse were like ghosts to her. She could hear them, she could feel them, but she could never truly know them. Sometimes, in the quiet moments before the light was lit, Eliza would let her mind wander. She imagined herself on one of those ships, sailing across the dark expanse, seeing the world, far away from the lighthouse that held her rooted to the land. But the land was her home, and the lighthouse, though it seemed to keep her locked in place, was hers. She would never abandon it, not for any far-off adventure. One evening, after lighting the lamp, Eliza sat by the window of the lighthouse keeper's cottage. She watched as the light flickered on, sending its steady beam out into the dark. A small sigh escaped her lips. As she looked down at the waves, imagining a ship on the horizon, the men on board, she thought, had no idea who she was. They would never see her. She was just another quiet light in the distance, another part of the sea's endless mystery. She dreamed of what it might be like to be one of them, to travel, to see the world, to be a part of something larger than herself. But for now, her place was here, in the lighthouse, sending out her light to guide those who sailed toward it. Can you imagine my dear friend, Eliza, writing in her diary, "Dear Diary, sometimes I wonder if the light is ever enough. I light it every night, and yet they never see me. I am nothing but a flicker in the dark, a whisper in the wind. How many times have I sent my light out, only to watch it fade into the night, carried away by the sea? I know I am important. I know that without the light, they might lose their way. But what of me? Do they ever think of the one who lights it? Do they even know I exist? I wonder what it would be like to be seen, to be remembered. But then, I suppose that's not why I do it. Perhaps the light is not meant to be seen. Perhaps it is meant to be felt, to be a quiet comfort for those who need it. Perhaps that is enough. Every night, Eliza would wait by the window, her eyes scanning the horizon. She never saw the ships, only the lights from their decks, shining faintly in the distance, like stars moving across the sea. But in her mind, she could see them. She could see the sailors, weathered and worn by their travels, their faces etched with stories of far-off places. She could hear the creaking of the ship's timbers, the calls of the gulls, the quiet murmurs of the crew. Each ship had a story, she imagined. One ship might be carrying a young man returning to his sweetheart after months at sea, eager to embrace her. Another ship might be carrying cargo, men working hard to bring goods from distant lands. Perhaps some of the ships were returning from war, their crews tired and burdened with the weight of all they had seen. She would think of each of them, wondering what their lives were like. She would wonder, too, if they thought of the lighthouse, the light that guided them home. Was it just a signal to them? A marker in the dark? Or was it something more? Perhaps, in some small way, she was part of their journey. One evening, as Eliza lit the lamp, a storm began to gather in the distance. The wind howled, bending the trees and sending waves crashing violently against the rocks. The lighthouse shuddered under the force of the storm, but the light remained steady, casting its beam into the night. Eliza's heart raced as she watched the storm approach. The waves seemed to rise higher with every passing moment, and she feared that the ships out there, who might be relying on her light, would not see it through the storm. What if her light was too weak to cut through the fury of the waves? What if they were lost, out there in the dark, and she couldn't reach them, but the light stayed steady? She climbed the steps again, her hands shaking slightly. The storm outside seemed to grow louder, the wind screeching like a wild thing, but Eliza's mind stayed focused. She reached the top and lit the lamp, feeling the rush of heat from the flame. There, in the heart of the storm, she felt her purpose clear. The sea was a vast, unpredictable thing, but the light was her constant. It was her promise, even if no one would ever thank her for it. It was her duty, her gift. On one of the ships passing the lighthouse that night, a sailor stood at the wheel, his face grim as he looked into the storm. The waves tossed the ship, but in the distance, he saw a light. It was small at first, just a faint glimmer through the storm, but it grew brighter the closer they came. That light was everything. It was the difference between safe harbor and disaster. He had seen it many times before, a beacon in the darkness, and each time he was grateful for it. But tonight, something felt different. Tonight, he felt a strange pull toward it, as if the light was calling him. He had never seen the girl who lit it. She was just a whisper in the storm, a shadow in the distance. But he knew she was there, somewhere, making sure that he, along with all the others, found their way. As the years passed, Eliza grew older, and her life at the lighthouse became a part of the landscape itself. She was no longer the young girl who dreamed of ships and distant lands. Instead, she was the quiet keeper of the light, her role as steady as the waves that crashed below. One evening, long after the ships had stopped coming, Eliza stood by the window and watched the light cast its beam across the water. She knew that, just as her father had taught her, the light would always be there, steady, unwavering. She had come to understand that the light wasn't meant to be seen. It wasn't meant to be a grand spectacle. It was meant to be a comfort, a guide, a small promise in the vastness of the world. And maybe that was enough. And so, Eliza's light, though unseen, continued to shine, steady and true, through every dark, quiet night. Perhaps you too have been like Eliza, lighting lamps for others in the dark, even when no one sees you. As you lay there, listening to the soft sigh of the night, remember that your light, no matter how quiet or small, has meaning. The world moves in mysterious ways. Sometimes our efforts are unseen, but they still make all the difference. And just like Eliza, you may never know how far your light will reach. But tonight, let it be enough to know that you are seen in the quietest of ways, by the stars, by the sea, and by the people who need it most, even if they can't always say thank you. So close your eyes, let the warmth of this thought settle around you, and know that the night is kind. May your dreams be filled with soft winds and far-off shores. Tonight, let me tuck another story beneath your pillow. A story stitched from whispers and worn threads. A tale embroidered not in gold, but in quiet bravery. We often celebrate the generals, the heroes with medals, the ones who shout. But tonight, we remember someone different. A woman with needle and thread, with eyes like smoke, and fingers that never trembled, even when the world did. This is the story of the seamstress who saved a war, not with bullets, but with buttons and secrets. Close your eyes, my dear friend. I'll tell you everything. Elise Doucet was born in a village where even the cobblestones seemed to whisper old prayers. A place where the bread always smelled of rosemary, and everyone knew which day Madame Leroux did her washing. Her mother had taught her how to sew before she could write her name, not out of charm, but survival. In Elise's world, fabric was currency. Needlework was a language. And patience? That was its own kind of war strategy. By the time the war reached the edges of her town, Elise had already lost too much. Her father to consumption, her brother to the mines, and now the echo of boots marched nearer every day. But Elise, quiet as the dusk, kept stitching. My dear friend, the Germans came with structure, order, and 1,000 grey uniforms. The village learned to live in curfews, in rationed soap, in looks exchanged beneath lowered lashes. But Elise, she noticed things. A slightly off seam on a soldier's cuff, a repeated phrase overheard, Zug nach Süden, train to the south. And then one day, a resistance courier who claimed he was just buying thread, slipped her a request. "Can you sew a secret into a hem?" She could, and she did. A stitch to the left meant go. One tucked under the collar meant wait. The red embroidery on the inner sleeve, that meant a shipment of arms would arrive. Her work passed unnoticed by the Germans, praised for its precision. But to the resistance, Elise became the woman who held the plan together, literally. And still, she never raised her voice. Her revolution was quiet and made of thread. Can you imagine my dear friend Elise writing in her diary in the spring of 1943? "Dear diary, the window leaks moonlight again. I haven't cried since the Morin boy was taken. Maybe I'm threadbare. Maybe I've become linen. I stitched the train details into Lieutenant Kessler's jacket today. He offered me tea. I smiled. I wanted to scream. What a strange cruelty to make me smile while I betray. But it's not betrayal, is it? It's a kind of promise that we will outlast them, that buttons will one day be just buttons again. God forgive me. Or don't. Just let me finish the hem." Elise's most daring stitch yet warned of a munitions shipment bound for Paris. The resistance intercepted it. The train never reached its destination. It was the first time the Germans truly noticed something was wrong. That week, Elise was questioned. 3 times. She spoke only of stitches, of fabric, of her love for tailored cuffs. They let her go. Then there was a boy named Luke. He was 10 years old when Elise first saw him sneaking scraps of bread to a starving dog. Later, she found out he was also sneaking messages. When he was caught, Elise claimed he worked for her. She gave up half her ration book to protect him. Luke lived. He grew old. And in a BBC interview in 1986, he said, "I owe everything to a woman who said she was just a seamstress. But she stitched my future when she could have saved her own." After the war, Elise Doucet didn't accept medals. She went back to mending hems and hemming truths. People forgot. But sometimes, someone would open their father's old jacket and find a curious line of red thread tucked inside. A secret kept safe by kindness. Not shouted, not even whispered, just remembered. So now you know, lovely one, about the seamstress who stitched through history like a quiet lighthouse. She asked for no spotlight, and perhaps that's why her light lasted longer. In a world that often remembers the loudest stories, it's the gentle ones that echo in our bones. Maybe kindness is like that, not in grand speeches or parades, but in a warm coat repaired, a crust of bread shared, a stitch in time, truly saving more than 9. Close your eyes now. Let the thread of her story weave into your dreams. And if tomorrow feels heavy, remember Elise, who carried the war in her thimble and never dropped a single stitch. My dear friend, sleep is an elusive mistress tonight, isn't she? That's okay. I am here with you. Come closer. Let the world outside fade away and take a deep breath with me. Let me tell you a story. a story of kindness, hidden away in the shadows of history, where the greatest of human acts are sometimes the smallest. It's a story about a boy, just a boy, really, who did something so simple, so pure. It would change the life of a man and, in some ways, the world. This man, Frederick Douglass, would rise from the ashes of oppression to become a voice for freedom. But tonight, we're not speaking of the great orator, the abolitionist, the icon. No, tonight we're speaking of the child, like any of us, who, against all odds, held on to hope through something so simple, bread and books. So settle in, my dear, close your eyes if you wish, and let me take you back to a time when even the smallest kindness could spark a fire, when a single moment could change everything. My dear friend, it's a curious thing, isn't it? How we look back on history and see the grand figures, the ones who shaped nations, the ones who fought for freedom and justice. But before they became legends, they were simply children. Children who, just like any of us, carried dreams and fears, hopes and disappointments. Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey was born into slavery in February of 1818. A child of the Maryland shore, his early life was full of contradictions. On the one hand, he was loved by his grandmother, by the fleeting moments of kindness he received in a world that otherwise sought to break him. But on the other hand, he was bound by chains, chains of body, chains of mind, chains of a world that told him, from the moment he drew his first breath, that he was nothing but property. It's difficult for us to imagine, but Frederick was just a child, torn away from his mother at a young age. His father's identity was never certain. And from the time he could walk, he worked the fields, gathering water, sweeping floors, toiling in silence. But even in the darkest corners of that world, Frederick found something that was his own, something no one could take, a hunger for knowledge, the power of words. You see, knowledge was not just a luxury for him. It was a form of resistance. And like all resistance, it came with a price. At a young age, Frederick was introduced to the brutal reality of education, an education reserved only for the few who could afford it, the ones who rule. For a slave, knowledge was a dangerous weapon. A slave who could read could no longer be controlled by their masters, and that was a threat. But even before he learned to read, Frederick's soul was filled with a quiet defiance, a child's defiance. He didn't know what freedom was, not yet, but he knew he wasn't supposed to have the one thing he craved, knowledge. Now, let me tell you about the boy, the one who would risk everything for a piece of bread and for a book. It was on one of the many quiet afternoons when Frederick was a boy, working in the fields, waiting for his chance to escape, though he didn't yet know how, when he met him, a young white boy, no older than Frederick himself, was tasked with a duty that seemed so mundane, so insignificant. He was to deliver bread to the slaves. You see, the bread was not just food. It was a tool of control, a reminder that even something as basic as hunger could be used to enslave the spirit. And yet, in this case, it was the bread that would ultimately liberate. The boy was curious, too. He had no idea that the small pieces of bread he handed out would have the power to change a life. And what did it cost him to share? A momentary risk, a piece of bread, a small slip in the hierarchy of an unjust world. This was not an unusual boy. He was just a boy, really, without the power or knowledge of what slavery truly meant. But there was a kindness in him that stood out. He saw Frederick not as a slave, but as something else. Maybe it was the hunger in his eyes, or perhaps it was the quiet strength that radiated from him, even at such a young age. Each day, he would bring scraps of bread, but it wasn't just bread. In those small crumbs, wrapped in the secrecy of a child's innocence, were books. Books the boy had somehow procured and hidden from the master's eyes. Books that would give Frederick the tools to fight not just for freedom of body, but for the liberation of his mind. What was it, do you think, that inspired the boy to share? Was it empathy, innocence, or was it simply the recognition of another human soul trapped in a cage of flesh and mind? Perhaps we'll never know. But what we do know is this. In those small moments, when bread became freedom and books became the key, Frederick Douglass found his first taste of the world outside the boundaries of slavery. Can you imagine what it must have felt like to hold a book in your hands when you were told that books were not for you? To feel the weight of the pages, knowing that each word was a rebellion, that every sentence was a challenge to the very system that kept you bound? That's what it was for Frederick. A book wasn't just paper and ink. It was a lifeline, a map to a world he had only heard of in stories, stories of freedom, of hope, of possibility. And yet, even with these books, the real challenge lay not in reading them, but in hiding them. For to be caught with a book would mean punishment, whipping, or worse. But Frederick wasn't afraid. He had tasted the power of knowledge, and now there was no turning back. It started with the Bible. It was the first book he encountered, a book given to him by his grandmother, though she herself could not read it. But it wasn't just a book of prayers. No, to Frederick, it was a book of power, a guide to understanding the world. He read it in secret, at night, under the dim light of a candle. It was not just a book of religion, but a book of resistance. Through those pages, Frederick saw a new world unfolding before him, a world in which he could no longer be enslaved, a world where the boundaries of his mind could stretch and break free. But it wasn't only the Bible. The boy who brought him bread also brought him other texts. Some were simple, others profound. They were messages from the world beyond the plantation, a world that whispered to him of possibilities. It was as if the books themselves were calling to him, urging him to break free. And so Frederick learned, slowly, quietly, with every stolen word and hidden page. He learned not just to read, but to think, to question, to challenge. Now, as I sit here, my dear friend, I want you to think about something for a moment. Think about the bread boy who gave Frederick more than just food. He gave him a gift that would echo down the ages. It's curious, isn't it? How we often underestimate the power of small acts. The bread boy did not know the full weight of what he was doing, but his actions, the kindness he showed, would change the course of history. You see, sometimes we think that in order to make a difference, we must do something grand, something that everyone will notice. But here, in this story, it's the quiet moments, the small gestures that have the power to change the world. One small act of kindness, one book, one piece of bread. That was all it took to ignite a fire in Frederick Douglass, a fire that would burn for freedom, for equality, for the right to be seen as a man, not as property. One small act led to a lifetime of courage, a lifetime of change. Frederick Douglass grew, not just in knowledge, but in courage. The more he learned, the more determined he became. He knew that to be free, he had to escape the plantation, not just physically, but mentally. He needed to break free from the chains that held his spirit captive. And so, with the wisdom he gained from the books, Frederick made his move. His escape was not just a physical journey, but an emotional and intellectual one. It was a journey fueled by the hope he had found in the pages of books, the hope that one day he would stand on the other side of freedom with nothing but his mind and his voice as his weapons. And when he did escape, when he finally broke those physical chains, he didn't stop there. He took the knowledge, the books, the lessons with him. They were his armor, his sword in the fight for justice. Did you know that Frederick Douglass went on to become not only an abolitionist, but also a tireless advocate for women's rights? After escaping slavery, he fought for the rights of the oppressed everywhere. He was one of the most influential voices in American history, not just for African Americans, but for anyone seeking justice. And yet, it all started with one simple act, a piece of bread, a stolen book, and a child's kindness. That's the curious thing about history, isn't it? Sometimes, it's the smallest acts that have the biggest consequences. Now, my dear, as the night deepens and the world outside settles into silence, remember this: kindness, no matter how small, has the power to change the course of history. The bread boy didn't know it, but his act of generosity was a seed planted in the heart of a child who would grow to change the world. As you drift into sleep, let the quiet warmth of that thought wrap around you. Kindness, even when it seems unnoticed, has the power to change everything. Good night, my dear friend. Sleep well, and may the world's quiet acts of kindness find you just as they found Frederick Douglass. My dear friend, it's late, The world outside is still, and the quiet stretches between the tick of the clock. There's something comforting in this hour, isn't there? Like the silence is holding us, wrapping us in warmth. I am getting sleepy now, but before I have one more story for you about kindness, a kindness that was given quietly under the snowflakes in the shadows of war. It's a story about the little things, the cups of tea, the spoons of honey, and the warmth passed from one soul to another, even when everything around them was cold. So curl up, take a deep breath, and let the story wash over you as we travel to a time and place where even in the darkest moments, kindness had a way of finding its path. Let it be a reminder, dear one, that in every shadow there is always a flicker of light. It was the winter of 1942, and Kraków, Poland, lay wrapped in the unyielding cold of war. The city had become a quiet battleground of its own, an occupied city under Nazi rule, full of fear, resistance, and silent acts of defiance. The streets were covered in snow, turning them into cold, desolate paths. People moved quickly, heads down, wrapped in whatever they could find to stave off the bitter chill. The war had already taken so much. So much more was still to come. In the heart of this frozen city lived Maria, a widow. She had lost her husband in the early days of the occupation, her beloved Mikołaj, a man of gentle words and quiet strength. He was among the first to be rounded up when the Nazis took over, a casualty of the terror that spread like wildfire through Europe. But Maria didn't mourn long in isolation. Though she lived alone, her heart was never truly empty. She had a way of finding the smallest comforts, of offering warmth when the world outside was nothing but cold and cruel. Her home, though small, was warm, with the comforting scent of tea always brewing. A tiny house tucked away in a quiet corner of Kraków, an unassuming haven, a place where weary souls could rest and be sheltered even if only for a moment. She had lived with Mikołaj for many years. Their home had always been a simple one, nothing grand, but a place of peace. Now that he was gone, Maria filled the silence with her small acts of kindness. Every evening she brewed a pot of tea, loose-leaf black tea, a small luxury that had become rare. She stirred in honey, thick and golden, a sweet relief from the sharp cold of the air. Her small, chipped teapot had once been part of a set passed down from her grandmother. It had seen better days, but like her, it endured. The tea was always ready by dusk, the honey always just enough to bring warmth to whoever was lucky enough to sit at her table. In those early days of the occupation, as her neighbours hid their fears, Maria found that the war was not only fought in the streets, but also in the smallest of things. Her acts of kindness became a quiet resistance. She never asked for gratitude, never needed praise. Her goal was simple, to bring warmth and comfort, even if just for a moment. Her home, though unremarkable, became known among those fighting for freedom, the resistance fighters, young men and women who risked their lives daily, hiding in plain sight, their movements a secret to everyone but those who dared to resist. And Maria with her tea, honey, and quiet strength, became an unspoken ally to these fighters. They would knock gently at her door when they needed rest, warmth, or a reprieve from the bitter cold. One evening, as the snowflakes fell thick and heavy from the sky, Maria sat at her kitchen table, staring out the small window. The wind howled through the cracks in the old wood, and the fire in her stove crackled softly. The room was dim, lit only by the flickering glow of candles. She knew that tonight the resistance fighters would come. They always did when the snow was thick, when the nights were long and bitter. Maria prepared the tea, as she always did, with care and patience. She boiled water and steeped the leaves, allowing the rich, dark liquid to fill the air with its comforting scent. She stirred in the honey, watching the liquid swirl into the warmth of the cup. The soft light of the candles danced over the room, casting long, gentle shadows on the walls. She wrapped the cups in cloth, the way she always did, so they would stay warm for their guests. Just as the clock struck midnight, there was a gentle knock at the door. Maria opened it, and standing in the doorway were two young resistance fighters, their faces pale from the cold. Their clothes were worn and threadbare, and their breath came in quick, shallow bursts as the wind whipped around them. They looked at Maria, both tired and weary, but also filled with something else. Hope, the faintest glimmer of it. "Come in," Maria said softly, stepping aside. "Warm yourself by the fire." They stepped in, shaking the snow from their boots and dropping their coats on the chairs by the door. The room smelled of tea and warmth, and they breathed it in like something precious, something they hadn't felt in days. Maria poured the tea into two small cups, handing them over without a word. They took the cups eagerly, but with reverence, as if the simple act of drinking tea was something more than just a moment of respite. They sat in silence, the fire crackling gently, the warmth of the room wrapping around them like a protective blanket. Maria sat across from them, her hands folded in her lap, watching them carefully. She didn't ask their names. She didn't ask where they had been or what they had done. The answer didn't matter. What mattered was that they were safe, even for just a few hours. And as the storm raged outside, as the world beyond her door grew colder and colder, Maria was content. There was no grand gesture here, no great act of heroism. It was the small things that mattered. The tea, the honey, the warmth. One of the fighters, a young man with dark eyes and a voice like gravel, looked at her. He had not spoken until now, and his words came slowly, as though weighed by the heaviness of what they had been through. "You know," he said, his voice low, "it's not often we find such kindness." Maria smiled softly, her lips curling in a way that seemed to say everything she wanted to say without a single word. "It doesn't take much," she replied. "Just a little warmth in the cold. My dear friend, did you know that during World War II, countless women, like Maria, played quiet yet vital roles in the resistance across Europe? Many of them risked their lives to hide soldiers, pass on information, or help smuggle food and medicine. Though their names may not always be remembered, their acts of bravery were no less significant than those of the soldiers on the front lines. Did you also know that the act of drinking tea has long been a symbol of peace and comfort? During the Blitz in London, for example, people would often gather around a pot of tea to find solace amidst the bombs falling overhead. In fact, many historians believe that tea was a psychological anchor during wartime, offering a sense of normalcy in a world turned upside down. And so, Maria's story continues in the quietest of ways, under the weight of snow, under the silent oppression of war. Her kindness, small but constant, was a flicker of warmth in a frozen world, a reminder that even in the darkest corners, there can be light. Tonight, as you lie in the stillness of the night, think of Maria and her tea, her honey, and her quiet bravery. She didn't fight with weapons. She fought with warmth, with care, and with the kind of kindness that never asks for anything in return. May you find a little bit of her strength in your own heart, dear one, and may the kindness you give, no matter how small, echo through the days ahead, just as hers did long after the snow has melted. Rest now. Let the quiet of the night hold you. Let the memory of Maria's simple act of kindness carry you into peaceful sleep. Sleep well, dear one. Tomorrow will be a new day, but for now, the world can wait. Good night.